Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It is great to see you. Well, I can't see you, but it's great to have you out there as we get started today. I just want to see how people are doing. So I've got a little poll for you that I'll put out there for folks who are watching live. Yeah, how are people doing today? Are you great? Pretty good? Doing okay? Not so good? My name is Melissa, and I am one of the AP World streamers for your Fiveable Cram season. So welcome, everybody, to our first Cram stream for AP World. We're here. We're going to do this. It's March 1st, so right, it's time to start reviewing. I'm guessing a lot of you are still in the middle of learning content in your classes, and that is a-okay. We're going to start our review off here, and we'll kind of catch everybody up. And by the end of Cram season, we'll all be caught up with all of our great content. All right, I'll give about 15 more seconds or so for people to give me some votes, and then we'll see how people are doing. All right, here we go. And so far, temperature check today, people are mostly pretty good. Couple folks doing great, a few folks doing just okay. Nobody in the not great category, which I'll take for a first stream. All right, let's dive in with some content, folks. I am ready for this. I hope that you are as well. As we get going today, I'm going to turn my closed captions on. These are the auto closed captions for Google Slides. So if it spells anything wrong, I apologize for some of the wackadoo closed captioning. And I'll be sure to use words like wackadoo just to confuse the closed captioning. No, I'm kidding. We're gonna get going, and this is gonna be great. So you're here for AP World History, and I'm calling this Unit 0. Some of you in your classes may have done a Unit 0, may have looked like a lot of different things, and so I'll talk to you about what I'm thinking of for Unit 0, and why I think this is worth our time. Quick heads up as we are going. You're being recorded right now. Well, the stream's being recorded. So if you ask a question or put things into the chat, your name will appear in the chat in particular, and some of that stuff may be seen. I may respond to you by name. So just be aware there's recording happening, and we'll get going. Speaking of recording, we sometimes use content from Fiveable in our socials. So if you are not following us on the socials, make sure you look for us there. We're at Think Fiveable. And because I know if I put it at the end of the stream, I'll forget to tell you about it. I'm going to tell you now about streams that are coming soon in AP World specifically. So today, March 1st, we're doing Unit 0. I'll be back again on the 6th for Unit 1 Cram stream at 2 p.m. Eastern. And then on the 9th, Unit 2 Cram stream with Mr. Beckman, who is my AP World streaming partner, and he is awesome. And then the 13th will be Unit 3, and we're going to have ongoing conversations, chat, and awesomeness happening on Discord. Speaking of Discord, have you met our amazing AP World TA, Natalie? So Natalie is here in the chat with us, and she is going to be answering questions and keeping track of what's going on there while I am teaching tonight. She'll actually be with Mr. Beckman as well. Natalie's amazing. But she is hanging out on Discord a lot, doing review sessions and answering questions. So huge shout out to Natalie. You're going to love her. And we are going to get started. All right, tonight or today, whatever time zone you're in this stream, we're going to talk a little bit of geography, right? This is review, and so we're going to start with some of the basics, key geography that you need to know, and why you should bother knowing geography for world history. We'll do a quick review on the themes for world history, and I'll give you like my guiding questions that I use to think about the themes. And then we're really going to focus in on religions and belief systems as a piece of context that is super duper helpful in understanding the rest of world history. So if you have questions as we go, you can drop them in the chat, and Natalie's going to do a lot of answering for me. But if I see things in the chat as well, I will make sure to answer those live. So yeah, questions, keep them coming. Okay, you've probably seen this map. Teachers all over the country, all over the world are using this map because this is the map that the College Board publishes with like the big picture view of the world, right? When we talk about the Americas, if you see that in a question, it means both North and South America and the Caribbean. If the question is talking about Africa, it includes anywhere in that continent. If the question is about Europe, it's a little bit of a fuzzier region, but roughly to the Ural Mountains. If we talk about Asia, right? It's places like China, Japan, India, Saudi Arabia, right? It's a big region. And then Oceania, don't forget about Oceania. That's one of the ones that people sometimes miss, which is Australia, New Zealand, New Guinea, and many of the Pacific Islands. So this is the big picture. And a lot of these regions do show up specifically named in AP questions. If you are looking for this map, I don't have a specific link to it because it's in a ginormous PDF. You can do a couple things if you want a copy of this map. You can download the slides for tonight's stream, and you can get the map that way. Or if you Google AP World History World Regions, this map will come up in a whole bunch of different places, including the College Board's course and exam description, which is where I found the high-res version on page 31. And Natalie's going to hook you up with it on Discord as well. But these big regions, they show up in questions. These are good to know, good to pay attention to. But these regions right here are the ones that you are definitely going to want to know. These are the named regions that specifically come up in a lot of questions. So you can see, right, North America and Latin America are specifically named. Notice that there's some overlap between those. Right, we've got different subregions in Africa. Notice that Egypt is classified as part of the Middle East. And that's a cultural thing because a lot of the culture and connection of Egypt historically has been more with the Middle East. Central Asia overlaps both with East Asia and with South Asia. Southeast Asia includes both some mainland countries as well as some of the island countries. East Asia is north of Southeast Asia. Oceania and Europe are not named on this map, but they are still, right, significant and important regions to know. You should know about both of these maps, right? The first map, these are like the big, huge regions, and you want to recognize the names of these. If you're asked a question about Asian empires, for example, you could include examples from the Middle East. You could include examples from India. You could include examples from China or Japan, right? But if you're asked a question specifically about East Asia on this map, you would want to focus your answer on China, Korea, or Japan, and not necessarily be giving examples from India, let's say. And one of the big reasons why I'm kind of pushing this geography thing right here at the beginning is because these are the terms that come up in the questions, especially questions like your DBQ, your document-based question, or your long essay that you might be writing for this exam. And if you can recognize the names of the regions and have a sense of where they are in the world, it's going to make it a lot easier to pull relevant examples into your thinking. So I've got a couple little quizzes for you, just asking you about applying your knowledge of these regions, and specifically thinking of countries within these regions. So just fun, informal, no grades attached to these quizzes. But first quiz I have for you: which of these countries is located in West Africa? Is it Namibia? Is it Mauritius? Is it Senegal? Or is it Tanzania? How well do you know your African geography? Now, these are the modern names of the African countries. Historically, would not necessarily have been named these places, but I figure I'd give you some modern names, a modern question, because we're all fairly modern people. I'll give you about 10 more seconds to answer in the poll. 3, 2, 1. Here we go. Correct answer was Senegal. Senegal is in West Africa. Namibia, if you went and Googled it, Namibia is on the west coast of Africa, but it's in southern Africa, in that region. Mauritius is an island country in East Africa, and Tanzania is also in East Africa. All right, let's do one more just for fun. Get you another style of question here. This one says, which of these is not in Southeast Asia? So as you're looking at the map and you're thinking about Southeast Asia, which of these places is not in Southeast Asia? Every once in a while, you get a question like this on the AP exam where they ask you which of these is not. And so 3 of the answers are accurate or true or correct. And you're looking for the one that is false, which is not what we're accustomed to. So I sometimes like to throw these in as good practice. All right, as we are thinking about Southeast Asia, I'll give you about 10 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Correct answer, Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is in South Asia. It's just off the southern tip of India. Indonesia is one of the island states in Southeast Asia. Laos is on the mainland, and Singapore is very, very tiny, but it is also on the mainland in Southeast Asia. Now, if you got any of these wrong, don't stress it. Don't feel bad at all about missing questions here. Right? This is for fun, practicing just a little bit, seeing how people are doing. But this is a good idea to know 1 or 2 countries in each of the regions, so that will help you pull relevant examples, right? The geography of the world is significant context for the history that happens. Knowing where it happened and what places are close or far away, these are all really important things to know. Another piece of College Board vocabulary that I think is super duper helpful are the themes. Different teachers have different acronyms for how they teach the themes. Personally, I am a spice tea teacher, but there are lots of different acronyms and lots of different ways of remembering and knowing the themes. But it's worth knowing the language that the College Board uses and how that language can be applied in the question. So this is just some real practical, like test-taking kind of knowledge that I'm going to drop on you with this slide. And again, go to resources, download the slide deck. Don't try and copy all of this down frantically. This is probably one of my more text-dense slides that I will throw at you. So you can just have my slide, and that'll be fine. You can, screenshot it or whatever you need to do. But there are 6 themes that we need to pay attention to. And I like to ask a big question to go with each of the themes to help me remember what kinds of ideas I would want to include if I were writing or choosing an answer that relates to one of these themes. So the first theme in my acronym SPICE-T is the social theme. When you see the word social or even the word society, you want to ask yourself the question, how do people interact with each other as individuals or in groups? And so this would include examples of things like class, social, right? Social classes, it's in the name right there, but classes. Race and questions around race and interactions between people of different races or ethnicities. Gender is a social category. So if you've got a question about society or about the social structure of a particular empire or time period, you can talk about class, you can talk about gender, you can talk about family organizations. Right, but that social is all about interactions between people, generally within a civilization. And so it's different from politics. Politics, right, could include interactions between governments, between countries as states or as governments. But because politics is answering the question, how do people or states gain and exercise power? So when two countries, right, we often use the word state in AP World to talk about a country. We use those terms synonymously with one another. But if states are in conflict with one another, or if states are allies with one another, if any of you are studying Unit 7 right now in your classes, I know that some schools have gotten that far already. The 20th century there's a lot of alliances that you want to pay attention to. But this political theme is even broader than just how do countries interact with each other, but it has to do with questions about power and authority. Who's in charge? How do those people get to be in charge? How do they claim power for themselves, or how do they defend their power from people who might try to take it? Or how do they use their power to oppress people around them that they may not care for? So power, authority, administration, right? How does a government actually function? All of these are political ideas that you could use if you were asked a question about politics. You might also be asked a question about the environment. And this is where I cheat a little bit and I use the I in SPICE-T. That my I is actually interactions with the environment. So not interactions between countries, but interactions between humans and the environment. And the big question we want to ask is, what are the consequences of humans acting in their environment? What effect does the environment have on population? If you see the word demographics, they're asking you about population. So how does the environment affect the population? How does migration or people moving around, how is that affected by the environment? Or how does the movement of people affect the environment? How do people affect the resources available on Earth, or how do those resources affect human lives? So consequences, right? Interactions between humans and the environment. My next big theme, a word that you're going to see showing up, is the word culture or cultural. You're going to see that word, and culture and society. Sometimes people mix them up, and it's not a huge big deal because there is a lot of overlap between them, but there's also some distinctions. Culture, the question I like to ask around culture is, how do people develop and express 3 things: beliefs, identities, and values? And this is actually what the rest of my lesson today is going to be about, is culture, beliefs, identities, and values. And so this includes religion. This includes non-religious beliefs. This includes values. What do people care about, right? A civilization, for example, that builds huge arenas for entertainment and sporting events is demonstrating a value that culture holds, that may not fit neatly into a religious category. Art, science, etc., all these things are cultural because they are ways that people express the beliefs, identities, and values that they hold. Really quick with the last two, economics. That one's all about the money, but it's about more than money, always. How do people produce, exchange, and consume goods and services? So this is like the labor systems. How do people create the stuff that they are creating? Do they do it through free production and paying wages to laborers, or through coerced or forced labor? Trade and commerce. These things are a big part of economics. Commerce, by the way, is a fancy word for trade. And then lastly, technology, right? What do people create to increase their efficiency, their comfort, or their security? So again, a big overlap in some of these themes, right? Technology that increases security would definitely be used for political and government purposes. Technology that increases efficiency would be a major economic factor. Technology that improves comfort might be relevant to cultural or to social ideas. But these are the big themes that you are likely to see. Excuse me. Right, big themes. And the one I want to focus on today are the belief systems and why you should bother spending some time knowing a few specifics about belief systems, even though basically all of the belief systems we talk about in world history predate the year 1200. So 2 reasons. Reason number 1 is that in the language that teachers are being asked to use, the College Board uses this phrase: explain how systems of belief and their practices affected, and then you fill in the blank with a region of the world from 1200 to 1450 CE. So even if your teacher doesn't use the unit numbers, right, unit 1 or anything like that, the first big chunk of time in AP World is 1200 to 1450. And one of the big questions that we're supposed to answer is, how do systems of belief affect people in China, in the Islamic world, in Africa, in the Americas, in Europe, in South and Southeast Asia? And so we actually need to know what the systems of belief are and what some of their major practices are in order to be able to answer that question. It's also true that these belief systems are foundational for the cultural traditions and the interactions that we see developing from 1200 to 1450. So the traditions that people are pulling from the past into this 1200 to 1450 time period, and the ways that different groups interact with one another, these things are rooted not exclusively in their belief systems, but the belief system can give you a lot to work with in understanding these big ideas. So what should I pay attention to if I'm trying to learn about all of these religions? Because it's a lot and you can't learn everything, and trying to memorize it all would just make you crazy. So thinking about beliefs. The College Board uses the language of beliefs, and I want to kind of give you a little focus here. What defines this system? You don't have to know every detail about all of these systems. That would be crazy. But you should know, like, the big defining beliefs that make one religious system different from another. The practices, right? How is this system lived out that makes it distinct from other systems around? You should know something about the origin and spread of these traditions, again, because how they interact with each other is important. And then the significance. How does this belief system affect the area of the world where it is most likely practiced? And that's the really big, important one that you should pay most attention to. I want to pause right here before I jump into some specifics about belief systems. I saw a great question from Sarah in the chat. If one of our essay questions, we evaluate a continuity, can we reference things from Unit 0 or from before 1200 CE? Yes. That is how you would bring this prior knowledge into one of your essays. You could absolutely talk about it in terms of continuity, things that came before and are continuing in an early time period or even a later time period in world history. Or if you're thinking about contextualization is one of the skills that you need for your written essays, you might reference older ideas that are still significant as context for a particular topic in world history. So yes, absolutely, this is content you can use. So before I get into like specific named religions, I want to define 3 terms that get used a lot and that sometimes people don't know. But these are trends and traditions from early religious systems that persist or last longer into world history and that people sometimes forget about. The first is polytheism. It's a belief system that follows multiple gods. Some polytheistic traditions have clearly defined names that have persisted along with them. Hinduism, for example, is a polytheistic tradition, but there are other polytheistic systems that follow multiple gods that we, in our modern historical view, no longer have clear names for. The second trend and tradition that you need to pay attention to is animism, which is distinguished from polytheism by the fact that it's a belief system that sees spiritual aspects in nature and in the world. So animism may be less formalized than polytheism, but there's a lot of overlap between them. A polytheistic system that has a god for the sun and a god for the moon and a god for the harvest and a god for the river. There may also be an animistic tradition that sees the spirits of the spirit of the sun, the spirit of the moon, the spirits of the plants or of the rivers. But the distinction being a named God versus a kind of spiritual aspect. And then the last trend and tradition that I want to mention that lasts or persists longer into world history is the idea of ancestor veneration. Ancestor veneration is just respect for the dead. Often accompanied with a belief that the dead can affect the living. So you have to respect and honor the dead because they can have an effect on your life here and now. And these 3 don't necessarily all fall neatly into the big named religions that we're going to talk about. Although, again, there's some overlap. I talked about Hinduism being polytheistic. Animism, we tend to see in a lot of those traditions that we've lost the names for and that we often just call by the people who practiced them. So American Indian religious traditions often have aspects of animism. Many African religious traditions that we don't have clear names for have elements of animism. Ancestor veneration is very common in many cultures and many belief systems. Kind of independent of some of their other shared beliefs. But for example, in China, ancestor veneration is super important and is practiced by people who follow a number of different other religions or belief systems. So just a real quick map, because I love maps. I just want to give you, here are the 7 named religions that the College Board specifically calls out, especially in the early units, that that the College Board wants you to recognize the names of. And I'm just going to plot them on the map so it can show you that Confucianism emerges in China, as does Taoism. Hinduism and Buddhism both originate in South Asia, or what is now India. And then Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all emerge out of the Middle East. And I tried to make a map showing where all of these traditions spread to, because they all spread beyond the areas of their origin, and my map making skills are not amazing. So I would encourage you again, to maybe Natalie can find us some great maps and drop them in Discord. Or if I find some great ones, I'll drop them in Discord. But there are other people who have created some amazing maps that I didn't have permission to use, but that show the spread of these traditions beyond their homelands of origin. And those would be really good for you to take a look at, particularly as we think about leading up to 1200. When we get into the first time period, so 1200 to 1450, where had all of these religions gone? Some of them spread a lot, and some of them spread a little bit. And I'm going to talk about one of the big reasons why a tradition might spread a lot or a little as we go through some of these specifically. And I'm going to chunk them regionally. So first, we're going to look at China. And what we're going to do, we're going to play a little game. I'm going to give you a document that reflects a key something about one of these traditions. I'm not going to make you necessarily guess which tradition it is. Some of them are going to be super duper obvious. But when I give you the document, I want you to tell me what aspects of that religious tradition you notice in the document. Some of these will be text, and some of these will be images. And so in the chat, this is a good fun time to just tell me what you know, and then I will add to that with some additional notes. By the way, all of my presenter notes that I'm going to be talking through are also in the slides, so you can totally peek at those if you want, or you can have them for later and you don't have to copy everything I say down. All right, here we go. So first document. This is from Confucius. So it's a document from China about Confucianism, obviously. But as you're looking at this document from the Analects, and I'll go ahead and read it if the text is a little small on your phone or something like that. But I want you to tell me, what key beliefs, practices, or ideas about Confucianism do you see reflected in this document? The master said, "In serving his parents, a son may remonstrate with them, but gently. When he sees that they do not incline to follow his advice, he shows an increased degree of reverence, but does not abandon his purpose. And should they punish him, he does not allow himself to murmur." All right, so yes, these are great ones that I'm seeing in the chat. Filial piety, somebody jumped out right from the beginning with that. Yes, right there, respect for elders and for filial piety. The family in Confucianism is a model for how relationships should play out in all aspects of life. Chinese belief systems often include supernatural elements, but they tend to emphasize social harmony and human relationships. And so filial piety and respect for family is one of the key beliefs in Confucianism, but so is the idea of unequal relationships. And filial piety reflects that, right? With younger members of the family showing honor and reverence to older members of the family. But these unequal relationships have responsibilities on both sides. Superiors should behave with benevolence. Inferiors should behave with deference. And so we see, right, that a son can gently correct his parents, and hopefully they would acknowledge his correction and follow him, right, with benevolence. But if they punish him, even if they're not behaving correctly, he must continue to behave correctly and not murmur at their punishment. Yeah, these are some key important things. It's also here, this document is an example of the importance of education in Confucianism. We have these collected sayings of the master that are being passed down and studied by future students. And so unequal relationships, education, filial piety. These are three key beliefs for Confucianism that would be good to know. The origin, right? China. And then the spread of Confucianism is largely in the places where Chinese political and cultural influence was strongest. So we see Confucianism spreading with other elements of Chinese influence into Korea, into Japan, and into places like Vietnam in Southeast Asia. The significance broadly of Confucianism as we get into the first time period, this is a central element of the Chinese imperial examination system. And it supported the even older Chinese belief in the mandate of heaven, which is marked by the idea of moral emperors who would be leading obedient subjects. There's this link here between culture and society and politics. I'm seeing a conversation in chat about like what themes does all of this fit into. Filial piety is a cultural value that expresses itself in social relationships. And Confucianism is a belief system, a cultural value that has a huge influence on the political system. So there's big overlap in these themes. The other major Chinese belief system that we want to pay attention to is Taoism. So we have this beautiful Taoist piece of artwork, the dragon pine. This one's a little more subtle, but I'm going to give you a chance anyway. So as you look at the dragon pine in all of its beauty, what key themes or ideas of Taoism do you see reflected in this image? I know this one is a little bit trickier because it's just an image. And so okay, once your answers started coming in, whew, y'all are amazing. Respect for nature. Yes, Taoism believes in, right, not just social harmony between people, but also the Tao, the way of nature, and that idea of human harmony with nature. Yes. The spiritual relationships with the environment, the connection with nature, balance. Yes. And the desire of people to align with nature, to create social harmony, to give up, right? We don't see the kind of key elements of cities or governments or politics or human civilization in this image. We see just a real focus on the natural world, and that the Tao gives people an invitation to give up these elements in order to create a life of social harmony. People said a lot about balance. I could have chosen a yin and yang symbol to reflect the balance of opposites, but I wanted something more subtle because the College Board isn't just going to give you a yin and yang symbol. They're going to give you something more subtle, and y'all did great with that. Taoism in Chinese culture is significant for a couple of reasons. The elites, so the uppermost, the most powerful social and political classes in China, often pursued Taoist ideals while functioning in a very heavily Confucian environment. So you see like scholar artists. So they would be teaching or working in the government by day, but then would come home like Wu Buli and paint these beautiful images to reflect their desire for harmony with nature. It's also true that Taoism was very popular amongst lower classes as it gave people power through connection to nature in magic and fortune telling and accessing, right? A lot of people are identifying that Taoism has an animistic element to it, the idea of like the spirits of nature defining and helping people. Yes, all of that, very key, very important. It's also worth noting that Taoist thoughts and ideas blend into Neo-Confucianism. Neo-Confucianism is a term that's really key in the early part of our study of world history with the Song Dynasty, where, original Confucian thoughts and values were blended with both Taoism and Buddhism to create something a little bit more overarching in Chinese society. Okay, so those are our Chinese traditions. And we're going to jump then into India, where again, we got two traditions, Hinduism and Buddhism. So take our first document from the Bhagavad Gita. Spoiler, not a spoiler. This is Hinduism. And while you're thinking about it, I'll read it. Every man intent on his own respective duties obtains perfection. Listen now how one intent on one's own duty obtains perfection. Worshipping by the performance of his duty, him from whom all things proceed, and by whom this is permeated, a man obtains perfection. One's own duty, though defective, is better than another's duty well performed. So what beliefs, practices, or ideas about Hinduism do you see in this text? Yes, dharma, the idea of the duty of your caste, that is the key to living a proper or moral life as a Hindu. Mm-hmm. Yes, what are some of the other key beliefs in addition to dharma or duty that you might remember and know about Hinduism? Seeing people saying things about like social classes or castes, right? That different groups have different dharmas, different duties, that dharma and karma are related, right? That your karma, the account of the good that you've done in the world, is influenced by doing your dharma. Knowing about rebirth and reincarnation, the cycle of rebirth and reincarnation is key in Hinduism, with an ultimate goal of liberation or moksha from this cycle. Yes, all of these are really key and important things to know. Hinduism originates very early in India, but it's not defined or codified until much later. And it is worth knowing as we think about the significance of Hinduism, right, that it reinforces a social structure or a caste system, but that Hinduism is also extremely diverse in the specific beliefs and practices. India, for most of its history, has been politically fragmented. And that's reflected in the cultural fragmentation of Hinduism, that different towns or villages or even families are going to emphasize different aspects of the Brahma, the kind of the divine reality that is manifest in the different Hindu gods. So different gods are more relevant or more significant or even exist in different parts of India. So some of the shared characteristics include things like duty and caste, things like reincarnation, but Hinduism is extremely diverse and very adaptable in different parts of India. Buddhism is our other major Indian tradition, and I picked 3 pictures of the Buddha from 3 different places where Buddhism winds up being practiced by 1200 CE. And so what do these tell you about Buddhism? You have a Sri Lankan Buddha and a Japanese Buddha and a Thai Buddha. Okay, I'm seeing people talking about peace, And yes, Buddhism is attempting to end suffering through right living and right practices. And one of the major practices in Buddhism is meditation. And so, right, that eightfold path of right living includes meditation. And that is a key idea that you can see in these Buddhas. I'm also seeing people talking about nirvana and the idea. So there's a lot of overlap between Hinduism and Buddhism, including reincarnation and a cycle of rebirth. But the goal of nirvana, of attaining release from suffering and ending desire through right living, right meditation, right practices. These are some of the core ideas of Buddhism. Buddhism emerges out of Hinduism. Yes, I'm seeing a lot of that in the chat. People are talking about, did Buddhism come out of Hinduism? Yes, it did. Largely rejecting things like the caste system and putting enlightenment in the hands of individuals. And so this is significant because one of the things many people saw, because I've seen it pop up in chat as your answers were flooding in, is that all of these Buddhas in different places in Asia, they look different because they reflect cultural syncretism, the blending of Buddhist ideas with indigenous traditions in different parts of the world, because Buddhism spread widely. One of the reasons that Buddhism spread so widely is it is known as what we call a universalizing religion. Or sometimes people call it a universal religion. But the idea is that you don't have to be born into a specific culture or ethnicity or social group or caste in order to practice and fully realize the promises of Buddhism. So Buddhism is much more individualistic than Hinduism, right? If Hinduism is focusing on the duty of one's caste, Buddhism is focusing on the right living and right practices of one's own self. And so as Buddhism spreads into new areas, it blends with some of the local traditions and ideas and becomes different forms of Buddhism. So we have Mahayana Buddhism and Theravada Buddhism and Zen Buddhism. So Buddhism is one of our examples of a universalizing religion. And historically, one significance of that is not only that Buddhism spread much more widely than any of the three we've talked about so far, but that it was also initially very popular among oppressed classes because it offered an individual opportunity for self-improvement and an escape from the traditions of caste and class. So if Confucianism says you need to stay in your place within your unequal relationships, and Taoism says you just need to go be with nature, but there's no real like escaping necessarily from the life that you lead, and Hinduism says you need to stay within your caste and do your duty, Buddhism says every person has the ability, if they follow the Eightfold Path and release their desires in this world, to end their own suffering and to attain enlightenment or nirvana. But this gets blended with other practices. So, for example, we see in India and in Central Asia the emergence of the idea of the bodhisattvas, those people who have paused on their way to enlightenment in order to essentially reach back and bring people along with them. We see different kinds of meditative practices emerging with different schools of Buddhism. And so it both spreads widely and blends. I know I'm going super fast, but I've only got 10 minutes left and I still have 3 traditions to get through. So let's go to monotheisms, part 1, because there's 3 and they wouldn't all fit on one slide. So we're going to look at Judaism and Christianity. Our first text is from I used a modern English translation, so from the Christian Bible, but it is also part of the Hebrew Torah, which includes a key Jewish prayer, the Shema. So this is from the Torah, and it says, "Now this is the commandment, the statutes and the rules that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you, that you may do them in the land which you are going over to possess it, that you may fear the Lord your God and your son and your son's son by keeping all his statutes and his commandments, which I command you all the days of your life, that your days may be long. Hear therefore, O Israel, and be careful to do them, that it may go well with you, and that you may multiply greatly, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey." And then this last line is a very, very significant and important Jewish prayer. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." So if we are thinking about Judaism, and we already know from the slide that this is a monotheistic tradition, what are some of the key important beliefs and ideas that we need to know about Judaism? And yes, lots of people have got monotheism. There is only one God. This is hugely significant because it was very different from the other indigenous traditions that Judaism emerged out of. Most people in the Middle East emerged out of polytheistic traditions. So the growth of monotheism, hugely important. The idea of a transcendent God above all other gods. Yes, that there's loyalty and obedience to that one God, that there are rules and commands given by God to his people, and that they should follow them. Yes, okay, people know a lot about Judaism. Look at that chat flying there. That's amazing. Yes, this also reflects a key idea in Judaism of covenant or promise between God and his people. Right? You see the language here that God is giving the people the land. That was a really key idea in Judaism, that they believed that their God had made promises to them and that they needed to obey and honor him, and that he would fulfill his promises. I couldn't pick a longer text, but we also see, if we go on in reading Jewish scripture, that there's an emphasis on personal morality. Many of the law codes are about personal, moral and upright behavior, but also for social justice, and that there is a specific care and concern in Judaism for those who are without power in a society. So widows, orphans, foreigners, refugees. These people are all spoken of with specific care in Jewish law codes. Judaism emerges out of the Middle East and spreads largely with the movement of Jewish people themselves through diaspora or conquest and exile. That as Jewish people move to different parts of the world, Judaism moves with them. Judaism, though, is not a universalizing religion in that it didn't seek a lot of converts. People were not widely converting to Judaism in order to practice it. Significance of Judaism, it's the earliest monotheistic tradition, and it is the root of later monotheisms. Okay, new text. This one reflecting Christianity. It's from the New Testament of the Christian Bible, specifically from the Gospel of Matthew. This is Jesus speaking in the beginning part, and then a reflection about him speaking in the second part. So some key ideas you know about Christianity as I read this text. Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. So what are you seeing in this text first? And then if you can't see anything in the text, just generally, what do you know about Christianity that is important? So an idea of heaven and the pathway to heaven, that it is narrow, it is singular, it is exclusive, and that not everyone finds that pathway. There are two outcomes: death and destruction, or the narrow gate that leads to life. Yes. Another key belief that's really important in the second paragraph here is the significance of Jesus to Christianity. Jesus of Nazareth, the historical person, Christians believe that he was the Son of God come as a person to pay for the sins of mankind by living a perfect life and dying on behalf of all people and their sins. So there's an emphasis on an individual personal relationship with God, as well as a commitment to personal righteousness and morality. And yes, most of you have already pointed this out in the chat, that Christianity is another universalizing religion. It was popular with oppressed and marginalized communities, originally seen as a threat to government authority in the Roman Empire. But by the time our class picks up, Christianity had been accepted by first the Roman government and then Western European governments more broadly. The Catholic Church, especially in Western Europe, became entwined into European governments. But this was another broad spreading religious tradition because it focuses on an individual's pathway to heaven. And so people could choose to convert, and it could seek converts. You didn't have to be part of a specific caste or class or ethnicity in order to fully participate. Christianity did actively proselytize through missionaries, as did Buddhism. There were Buddhist missionaries who would go and spread the teachings of the Buddha, Christian missionaries who would go and spread the teachings of Jesus. That's another mechanism of these universalizing traditions that we want to pay attention to. Yes. And then our third monotheism is Islam. And so again, thinking about the first the text, but then your broader knowledge of Islam. These are good. This is a quote from the Quran itself, and says, "Those who surrender themselves to Allah and accept the true faith, who are devout, sincere, patient, humble, charitable, and chaste, who fast and are ever mindful of Allah. On these, both men and women, Allah will bestow forgiveness and rich reward." So yes, this is another monotheistic tradition, right? There's a devotion and a surrender to Allah, to one God in Islam. Surrendering to God, submission to God. That is actually what Islam means, is submission. There's evidence in this text of the 5 pillars, not of all 5 pillars, but of the 5 pillars that remind Muslims of Allah's deity. We see evidence of fasting. We see evidence of charity. These are 2 of the 5 pillars. Devotion and sincerity in their prayer and declaration of Allah as God. These are parts of the 5 pillars that are key practices in Islam. Islam originates specifically with the Prophet Muhammad in around 610 CE on the Arabian Peninsula. It is also a universalizing religion, and so spreads widely from Arabia throughout the Middle East, into North Africa, to Spain, to East Africa, West Africa, Central Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia. Spread with missionaries, as well as with merchants, as well as with militaries. The 3 M's of universalizing religions: missionaries, merchants, and militaries. One of the key significances of Islam, and we'll get to this in our stream on Saturday, is the cultural link between Islamic societies. This was a very widespread feature and faith. And so societies who shared the belief in Islam tended to share other attitudes and ideas along with that. And we'll get into some of those details as we talk about Dar al-Islam, the world of Islam. that existed around 1200 CE. It's also significant to note that there's tension with non-Muslim societies as Islam spreads. So we're going to see tension between Muslims and Christians in Europe and in the Middle East, the Mediterranean. We'll also see, as Islam spreads into Central and South Asia, tensions between Islam and Hinduism, right, and monotheism and a very open, diverse polytheistic tradition in India. There's a lot going on that we'll need to pay attention to going forward. Whew, that was a lot. We flew. I talked fast, and you all talked even faster in the chat. It was amazing. Thank you all so much. As I leave you today, I want to thank you all for coming. Thank you for your amazing participation. And I want you to keep the conversation going. Natalie is going to be hanging out in Discord. There'll be a few other awesome AP World TAs hanging out there as well. So please join us over in the Fiveable Discord on the AP World channel. She's going to keep talking about a lot of this great content for at least the next half hour. So jump on over there, enjoy the conversation. You all are amazing, and I will see you in the next stream. Bye, everybody.